This week we've been hearing about the plight of the pulp and secondary fibre industry in northern BC. With another perspective on the changes needed in the province's forests, Michelle Connolly joins us now. She's with Conservation North, an organisation dedicated to ecological solutions in central and northern BC. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning.
You've heard some of our interviews earlier this week about the pulp industry in the province. What were some of your initial thoughts from the guests?
Well, listening to two of your guests this past week, I was not surprised that we're facing, what industry calls a, quote, fiber shortage, which is really a shortage in natural forests. And your guest after that also repeated that this is having really serious consequences on nature. The default land management policy for all public land across BC really is that every stick of timber that's eligible for logging, unless it's explicitly protected in a park or an ecological reserve or something like that, is available to log. And in fact, it's been provincial policy since the 1940s to convert all natural forests, so including old growth, that's all ages of natural forests, into thrifty managed forests containing commercially valuable conifers, so basically tree farms for growing two by forests. So land management in BC is really dominated by a culture that sees all natural forests as places to be converted into managed plantations. And the effect of that is that we're seeing fall down take place. So that's when you have to make a downward adjustment in your expectations when you're going into second growth. Our group, Conservation North, did an analysis that was released last year called Seeing Red, and it's a visual tool to see how much loss of primary forests we've had in BC from roads and logging and other industries as well. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that we are running out of natural forest really quickly.
It shouldn't be surprising, as you say, and your group is dedicated to protecting the forests. I guess the other flip side is the people and the towns dependent on that industry, or whether it's forestry or the pulp industry. What's your message to them now that we're seeing this other side?
Yes, we're seeing downturns in the forest industry that should have been predicted by the experts looking at this. This isn't just a matter of fires and beetle kill. It's a matter of 100 years of voracious, rapacious pillaging of natural ecosystems. That's what's fed into our, the economy of our region. And it has been, economically a really great thing for us to do that. But the cost, of course, is that we're now in a biodiversity crisis. We know that wildlife numbers are declining at rates that are unprecedented. And we know this because biologists who count things for a living are telling us this. That matters to people in our region as well. Everyone wants to have access to wild foods, hunting opportunities, fishing opportunities. Those are real values here for people, as you know. And we probably need to start thinking about doing other things in our region. Prince George has a really impressive network of people who know about growing food. We've heard a lot in the media recently, and of course, all of us have experienced this personally, myself included, of course, is that food prices are going way up. Why aren't we looking at a regional food economy, food security? We're very food insecure in this part of BC. Most of our food comes up the highway. Last year, we had a pretty horrific natural disaster that blocked off access to all the trucks that bring us food. And the pandemic should have been kind of a wake-up call for that as well. So we need to be looking at other economic opportunities and not just talking to the people that have kind of a vested interest in doubling down on the current extractive economy that we are in right now.
How optimistic are you about the reality of changing the way things are done? I'm specifically talking about what you just mentioned, when we talk about the industrialization of the forest industry, but changing forestry practices in the province. Can the government do it?
I would say that forestry practices need to be shifted to the parts of the landscape that have already been exploited. So if you look at our Seeing Red map, everything in red has been logged in the past. And one big message from our group is that we should focus on protecting areas that are still in green. So primary forests, those are the forests that are free of any history of industrial intervention. And we need to be focusing our management in the large proportion of BC that is now red. So it's been degraded by logging or other activities. That shouldn't be radical. And we know that we can get lots of benefits, carbon and climate-wise, from doing that. In fact, protecting living carbon capture and storage systems like wetlands and natural forests is really critical to doing something about the climate. And there's also a really interesting opportunity pending around Indigenous protected areas. We need to be supporting Indigenous communities in protecting their lands. And although I personally have, a lot of issues with the idea of monetizing nature, because I don't really believe that nature should have to pay for itself in order to exist, there is the opportunity for carbon to be monetized now. And the benefits from doing that ought to go straight to First Nations, for example. And of course, there are many, funding opportunities from protecting land as well. Philanthropic, guardian funding, and that kind of thing.
But back to pulp, how do you see that sector continuing at this point?
That's a very good question. I recall from the interview the other day that the representative from the pulp industry was suggesting that we have 40 million hectares of burned forest that they believe in salvaging. And it was really interesting, your selection of guests the following day, because Dr. Phil Burton happens to be an expert in, what not to do with forests that have had fires or insect outbreaks. The only argument for logging a place that has had a fire or an insect outbreak is an economic one. And so if the pulp industry is only interested in money, then that's what we ought to do. If as a society, however, we are interested in sustaining nature, we can't do that. So fire creates ecological variety to support the full complement of wildlife in BC. Our wildlife evolved in forests that burn. And disturbances like that, for the most part, leave a forest intact. Charred wood is really valuable habitat for woodpeckers, cavity nesting birds, mammals, all those things. It's just not a long-term solution to go, we have 40 million hectares of burned forest, and what we want to do is go into what are essentially, a lot of these areas would have been natural forests, or they're still natural forests actually, and they're still functioning places. And their plan is to go in there and just nuke them all. That just seems like not a very good plan. So I think they really need to rethink that.
Yeah, is it nuking or is it making better use of what is there? I don't mean specifically burned out areas, but areas that do have salvageable timber, not proper usage for say 2x4s or dimension lumber.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I suppose if you're looking at things from a kind of Calvinist lens, like if you're going, what's the highest and most efficient use of this land? Then there are different ways to use primary forests, natural forests. But I think a better view is really to look at the integrity of our landscapes as a whole. The BC government, took kind of a big step actually when they said that they thought ecosystem health should be the priority for all lands, as opposed to, just sourcing places for, quote, fiber. So I also want to add that it's very much part of the forestry mentality to go into places and to convert them to, quote, healthy plantations. That was the language that came out of your first interviewer with the representative from the pulp industry. I was not at all surprised to hear that language, because that's the governing kind of mentality and language of industrial forestry, that somehow self-organized, self-maintaining forest ecosystems are, quote, unhealthy, and we need to convert them to managed plantations. We've already done that with so much of the landscape, right? And all we're saying is we somehow need to reconfigure things so that companies can access places that have already been degraded and stay away from natural forests.
Sounds like we have some tough choices ahead, Michelle.
We do.
Thank you very much for taking the time to spend with me this morning. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill.
Michelle Connolly is a director with Conservation North.